In fact, I'm going to start recording now. So welcome again. My name is Meredith Burks. I'm with Redleaf Press. I'm really excited to be hosting David Sobel here for his presentation. David has spent the last 40 years working in the field of child development, place-based education, and parenting with nature. His expertise and passion led him to be identified as one of the, quote, gurus and rock stars of environmental education by Teacher Magazine. He currently serves as a professor emeritus in the education department at Antioch University in New England, and he is the author of Nature Preschools and Forest Kindergartens, and his newest book is The Sky Above and Mud Below, published by Redleaf Press. So David, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I am going to drop off my camera and hand it over to you to start your presentation.
Thanks, Meredith.
Thank you.
I mostly want to start by thanking all the contributors to this book. There are 18 different contributors. They all were graduate students at Antioch University, New England, in the nature-based early childhood certificate program. They all received fellowships, a big chunk of money for which they then had to write about how they naturalized their early childhood programs. And so the book is really a compilation and organization of all their articles, and then my putting together chapters that kind of put the different kinds of articles in context. So it's really their work that I'm going to be sharing, their really good work that I'm going to be sharing today. And apologies to any contributor to the book who I don't use one of their articles for. I only couldn't do everybody. I wanted to share the reason for the title of the book. The title of the book is The Sky Above and the Mud Below. It was the name of a movie made in the early 1960s about a Dutch-French expedition, an anthropological expedition to New Guinea to explore a whole bunch of tribes that had never really encountered white people in the highlands of New Guinea. And the movie is really about the anthropologists being amazed and kind of not shocked, but kind of struck by how different these cultures were. And it was also about how the New Guinean people viewed the anthropologists. So I imagine the folks from the early childhood certification office in your state coming to visit your nature preschool and reacting the same way the anthropologists did, thinking, why are these children barefoot? And, why are they painting their faces with raspberries? Is that dangerous? So this image of the New Guinean child is a nod to the title of the book and that difference, that cultural difference that is happening in early childhood programs. I'm going to start with a little bit of context from the first Nature Preschools and Forest Kindergarten book, and then move into the Sky Above and Mud Below book. I've always loved this image because I think it's about, it really expresses the joy of being outside with kids, and that's what we're really aspiring to. This stuff, this key features of nature preschools and forest kindergartens. This premise that we're trying to use woodlands and meadows and streams and ponds, and in some cases beaches and salt marshes, whatever natural setting is available to us as the context for learning. And the idea is this regular, frequent contact in the same setting over a significant period in all weathers. Going back and having outdoor classrooms in the same place that you go back to day after day or week after week. And then the aspirations are similar in early childhood programs as they are in conventional programs, with a greater emphasis on this notion that we're doing is laying a foundation for stewardship behavior. So a little bit of a theoretical frame here on what curriculum is like or should be like, from my perspective, in play-based early childhood programs. in natural settings. So it's important to think about nature-based early childhood programs as a subset of play-based early childhood programs. And so I've loved this diagram, and it's in the Nature Preschools and Forest Kindergarten book by Ed Miller. The diagram comes from Ed Miller and Joan Amon. And they articulate this notion of there being a kindergarten continuum in terms of how teachers approach curriculum. On one end of the continuum is the laissez-faire, loosely structured classroom with lots of play, but not a lot of active adult support, and it's often chaotic. And on the other end of the continuum is this didactic, highly structured classroom, which is teacher-led instruction, a lot of emphasis on academic, early reading and math. And their contention is that neither ends of this curriculum continuum are valuable or maximally productive for kids. Instead, what you want is somewhere in the middle, either the classroom rich in child-initiated play or the playful classroom with focused learning. That's where you get this balance between some attention to curriculum goals, early reading and math and socialization, but also attention to the development of resilience and child-initiated learning. So I'm going to show you one example of what this looks like in practice. Okay, so this is from the Sabbath School in Richmond, Virginia. It actually happened probably more than a decade ago at this point, but I love it as a story. And so these kids are a little bit older. These are kind of might be kindergarten through first or second graders. And so the teachers at the Sabbath School started to take children out into this urban park that was adjacent to the school, and the kids gravitated to this fallen down tree. And then there were two different subgroups of kids that were playing around the tree. The kids on the right side of the tree, labeled deconstruction, were trying to loose the trunk from its main support. So they wanted to get that trunk of the tree separated from the stump. They wanted to make it fall down. The kids at the other end of the tree trunk were the fabrication kids. They were making a chocolate factory, chocolate being that powdery mocha colored stuff that pine wood turns into. They're making a chocolate factory, and they were creating a history museum. And the kids were kind of independently working at both ends of the tree, but then the fabrication kids started to get nervous about the deconstruction kids knocking the tree off of the stump. Also, some kids like to walk along the top of this tree, and the children were upset that if the deconstruction kids knocked the stump off, it wouldn't be as much fun to walk along. So the deconstruction kids, who turned out to be more boys than girls, whereas the other end was more girls than boys, the deconstruction boys agreed to, if anybody was on the tree, they wouldn't do deconstruction. So the debate between the kids was, Stella, who was a fabrication kid, she said, please come down here just for this tree. It's a special tree. People like climbing on the tree. Luke, on the other hand, said, you can always climb on other things and make another climbing tree. So this little bit of a, how do we use the natural resource debate was emerging. So on the basis of the fact that the deconstruction kids had said, well, if anybody's on the tree, we won't do deconstruction, Oliver, no way to say it, Reese, initiated a nonviolent sit-in. He just sat on the tree during outdoor time, which meant that the deconstruction kids couldn't deconstruct. So the teachers realized that what had started as a play activity, a self-initiated, that loose end of the curriculum activity could develop into a more teacher-centered activity. So the teachers took the debate that had emerged outside in the woods back into the classroom and had the kids have a debate about the pros and cons of different ways of using the tree. So for deconstruction, kids said persistence is good, like in the Iliad. This is, of course, what we want as teachers, is for kindergartners to be quoting classic literature. And Drew would say, Drew said, it'll be fun to watch when it falls. It'll make a big cloud of dirt. I had to admit that that idea appealed to me as well. Against deconstruction, Nora was saying, leave nature alone. It's part of the forest and animal habitat. It'll squish us when it falls. And Annie, it'll be a problem for kids that can't climb on it. So I want you to think about this in relationship to the Common Core key points in writing. So the Common Core says, for young kids, the ability to write logical arguments based on substantive claims, sound reasoning, and relevant evidence is a cornerstone of writing standards. So I contend that what was happening in this activity was that the skills being developed in the dead log debate were children learning to take a stand and argue for what they believe in. They were using literature and history to support their argument. They were recognizing that nonviolent action can be a method for making a point. But some of what was happening there was that they were developing the capacities to do the kind of writing of logical arguments. These were the precursors to writing logical arguments. And debating using sound reasoning and relevant evidence. And so I think what's happened here is that what started out as purely a play activity got recruited into that middle of the curriculum continuum. Okay, so that's a good, for instance, of how to balance play and more cognitive development, learning kinds of things, is how to find this intersecting balance between the two. So I'm going to move into some examples of what I think are great hits from the Sky Above and the Mud Below book. And I'm going to start with some examples of program structures. And then I'm going to move to more curriculum examples, and we'll get back to some of that emergent curriculum, balancing play and learning ideas at that point. So first, getting organized. What do you need to do to actually start moving your classroom and curriculum outdoors? One of the ideas is the importance of developing an outdoor infrastructure. This example comes from the Heartland Elementary School in Heartland, Vermont, where there's been this big Forest Days movement starting about 5 or 8 years ago, to do 1 day a week in the woods with public school kindergarten kids. And this is one of the schools that adapted this 1 day a week in the woods program. And they have great infrastructure, these nice little benches that you can see around the campfire, the stump circles, storage areas, outdoor outhouses for bathroom facilities. It really makes a difference if you create the kind of appropriate structures that make kids, moderately comfortable outdoors. The other, early thing you've got to deal with is appropriate clothing. This comes from an article by Audrey Ferguson, who worked at the Forest Gnomes Wald Kindergarten. I forgot to say that lots of the people who I'm going to talk about as writers of these articles work at different places than they did when these articles were written. So it affiliates them with the place where they were working at that point. So this is the kind of appropriate winter clothing guide from this book, from her article. There is a great New York Times Wirecutter article from just about a week ago that I will forward to Meredith, and maybe she can send out to everybody. That was an article about the best specific gear, and it's very specific as to brands of gear for outdoor wear for young children to wear. Really nicely done, with interviews from Liza Lowe, who works at Antioch with me, and Sally Ann Anderson from New Mexico. When you move outdoors, it's not a kind of an open-ended, okay, we're just going out to play. There's going to be a schedule, and there needs to be a predictable schedule. This is from the Teton Valley Community School in Victor, Idaho, where you would presume in Idaho that, well, you just go out the door and there's access to good woods to use for outdoor learning. Well, there isn't in this situation. So one day a week, they load kids onto a bus and take them to a national forest site that they use for their outdoor learning. And you can see here at the 10:15 to 11:15, there's small group exploration. At 11:15, there's whole class free play. The small group exploration is led by teachers. They divide the kids up into small groups, and it's a more focused activity with the kids that might have some kind of literacy or math or science aspect to it. And then there is also a session of time, a chunk of time, the whole class free play, when the kids are basically allowed to do open-ended free play. So in all these programs, what you really want is a predictable schedule and a balance between teacher-directed activities and learning and student-directed initiated play and learning. From the same school in Idaho, you need a consistent set of rules. This is the 3 Woods rules that they have in this program. And you don't need to have these specific rules, but you need some 3 or 4, a set of rules that everybody gets taught and knows. And the top illustration is an illustration of rule 3: if the stick's bigger than you, need a friend to help. The bottom illustration is an illustration of another kind, not really a rule, but a protocol that the kids have to follow. It's the animal drill. So in this situation, it's feasible that what's going to happen are kids going to, a bear or a moose is going to show up in their play area in the woods. And so the teachers have to teach the kids what to do with a big animal drill. And with all these questions, after they've introduced the rule, they have the kids do a drawing worksheet to illustrate the rule. So if you look at that animal drill, in addition to moose and bear, the other kinds of big animals that might show up that you have to be concerned about are unicorns. And I love the fact that there are still places in the United States where you can potentially encounter unicorns in the woods. I loved this. I loved it when this idea showed up, because it was just one of those things that seemed so obvious, but I had never thought about it. Though in Scandinavia, it's much more common. And this was the idea of at All Together Now in Montpelier, Vermont, that Katie Swick documented. Is they decided to do nap time and rest time outdoors. Obviously during the more temperate months. And in the beginning, some of the kids didn't really like it. And some of the kids never really rested because they were kind of engaged with the observations, the natural world observations. Some kids said it was too buggy. Some kids wanted to do this every day. But gradually the kids acclimated to it and really appreciated it. And it's just another way to undergird the fabric of what you're doing in your program with the natural world. This is from a great program at the Storyteller Children's Center in Santa Barbara, and the program is mostly for foster children or children at risk. It turns out that most of the families are Latinx. So really the child group and the parent group are mostly Latin. And in coordination with the Wilderness Youth Project in Santa Barbara, they orchestrate a family camping weekend outdoors. And this is something that most of the kids and a lot of the parents have never done camping in the out of doors. And so, if we're going to change children's experience and make their world much more based in nature, what we really have to do is change the culture of families so that families are more disposed towards outdoor recreation and outdoor playtime and outdoor family time. And so this is really an effort to make that happen. And I love this letter from a parent, or actually not from a parent, you'll see who it's from, about the camp out. Thanks for your invitation to the camp out. It was an unforgettable experience that I enjoyed with my loving family members, my mother, my daughters, and my grandson. So if you figure that out, if she's referring to her mother, my daughters, and my grandson, then the mother that she's referring to is the great grandmother of the grandson. So we've got 4 generations that were on this camp out. My childhood memories and feelings came back to my mind with this experience. I could enjoy nature, the river, the stars, the moon, and all the people who attended the camp out. Thank you to each person who made it possible. And then the last line, I wish from the bottom of my heart that this camp out does not become the only one that I can attend. God bless you. And God bless our troops, as our politicians would say. So it's a great testimony to how important this can be when you kind of work with families as part of your nature-based programming. So now I'm going to move into talking about curriculum. This is a wonderful picture from this is an after-school program. I'm trying to remember what they called it. It was a forest after-school program at the Waldorf School of Baltimore. And so this is another good way to get nature-based programming into your early childhood program or elementary program. Starting with a nature-based after-school program is a good starting point. So back to Santa Barbara. This article was written by Alicia Jimenez, who's a teacher at Storyteller. And I loved this, her piece on using real tools. So you've got a picture of a child with the saw, and he's got eye protectors on. And then in the other picture, she's using a vegetable peeler to peel the bark off of that piece of wood. Activity centers and activities that help children develop tools are one great thing to be doing. I actually wanted to read a quote from Alicia's article, where one of the kids said, "Everybody, my daddy said I need to be careful because saws can make you get blood if you touch the sharp little things." So these opportunities to teach safety when you're using tools with kids. Now, I love seeing what I call convergent evolution, which is that here's another article from the Chicago Botanical Garden written by Sarah Sheldon, where she talks about the importance of tools in her outdoor programming as well. So if you look carefully, you can see the use of 3 different tools. There's both, in the one on the left, there's scissors cutting off the tops of the leeks or the scallions. And then there's a child in the other image with a bucket, and then there's all those squirt bottles in that big yellow container. And so convergent evolution is when programs in different parts of the country start to realize that certain things have an inherent appeal and learning value for kids. And so both in Santa Barbara and in Chicago, this understanding of tools being important has emerged. Then Sarah wrote another article on the wonderful world of brooms. I think this article starts off with her saying, brooms, who would have thought, right? And she's talks about how many different kinds of brooms she found to have available for the kids, and all the different things that kids love to do with brooms. In another article later in the book, there's a story about using loofahs to scrub off vegetables that are picked from gardens. So all these things that allow kids to, from a kind of Montessori perspective, use kid-sized tools to do real work. Another article from Sarah, and we're moving into the language arts piece right now. So take a look at that picture on the left there and look closely. to see that the kids are looking at a bunny, but the bunny is missing some significant part of its body. There is no head on that bunny. So Sarah and her children came upon this headless bunny one day. And Sarah does this great practice of having the children do outdoor dictation, so that when they come across a dead animal or they've done something exciting, she'll sit down with the child and the child will dictate. This is part and parcel of a bigger practice of doing what Vivian Paley calls story acting. So she has the kids narrate, and here's what one of the children narrated in relationship to the bunny. Once upon a time, there was a bunny when it was alive. Then it broke its head off from a fox, and then it was bleeding. A big predator ate it. Then the family came to see the dead bunny. Then they took the bunny to the hospital. The doctor came and fixed it. Then it was all better, but it was still hurting. So the doctor gave it a big Band-Aid and made it feel better. Then the bunny was better. The bunny went home and took a nap. The end. So nice. It's kind of like seeing unicorns. It's so nice to know that after your head gets cut off, you can still go home and take a nap and be better. So this whole practice of 3 and 4-year-olds doing dictation is a good precursor to the writing process, the language experience writing process, as kids get into kindergarten and 1st grade. In the language development mode, still, inclusive language and language inclusion at the Michigan State Tollgate Farm and Education Center. This article is written by Brooke Alarm. She wrote a bunch of really interesting articles. This one was about, that focused on this little Korean child who came to the program with essentially hardly any English. And so Brooke describes how they used the presence of a Korean child who was speaking another language to educate the other kids, and how the experience at the farm really contributed to this little girl's English language learning. So I'm going to read a passage from her article. She says, to ensure that our non-native speakers, including Nari, felt connected to the group, we strove to embrace language diversity. To introduce this concept, we said, we speak many languages at the farm. Not me, said one child, I speak kid. To develop a global perspective of languages in a developmentally appropriate way, opening children's minds to the fact that more languages exist than the one they speak, we chose to connect language diversity to our farm animals. We asked, what language do cows speak? The children responded with giggles, saying moo. We worked to learn and practice the languages being spoken within our farm community, such as greeting each other in Korean. I'm not going to try and pronounce that, or the cows with moo. So they were trying to say there are lots of different languages, so that all the kids started to understand the existence of different languages. And then she said, how could we support language learning? By developing a strong learning community combined with repeating targeted vocabulary in multiple contexts, we created an environment in which Nari felt she could experiment with speaking a non-native language. She heard vocabulary focusing on common themes by engaging in authentic tasks, such as brushing a horse or milking a goat. She heard targeted vocabulary through the use of puppets in children's literature and games and music and movement. We used gestures and other visual cues such as photos to aid understanding Nari in learning English. And so then at the end of the time that Nari was in the program, there was this letter from her mom. And the letter said, the most notable change is that she uses English a lot more. Oftentimes she surprises me by saying whole sentences. We saw she speaks, says hello, giggles with friends in English more. Also, she started to ask for something she wants in English as well. In our perspective, it eased our concern for the language barrier. And so there's a lot of anecdotal examples similar to this, where children who are learning English as a second language do particularly well in outdoor settings, in part because there's so much language being used in conjunction with real world things and activities. And so it's easier to tie the new language to tangible objects and tangible processes rather than tying things to images of objects, which is what happens in the classroom a lot of the time. Back to Santa Barbara. This is from the math section in the book where they were, because there was a whole piece on measuring rainfall, but the most charming aspect of this was that Alicia, knowing that there was these big rainstorms coming to Santa Barbara, which were a kind of a rarity for about 4 or 5 years there, she had the children watch the Gene Kelly movie in which he does the singing in the rain routine and walks around in the dancing and singing in the rain with an umbrella. And so the kids identified all the things that Gene Kelly did in the Singing in the Rain movie, and then they went outside and did the same activities that Gene Kelly did. And it was, again, it was one of those things that I thought, what a brilliant idea. So the kids got, there's that great scene of him standing under the water spout with the water pouring onto the umbrella. So the kids got to do that. This is one of my favorite examples of emergent curriculum, written by Megan Gessler, who at that point was at the Kendall County Forest Preserve. She's now at the Morton Arboretum outside of Chicago. And with her children one day, she was walking through the preserve, which is pretty big. And she found a geocache, this ammo box in a tree. And they opened it up and they found, this is what they found inside, all these kind of golden coins. The children pretty much figured out right away that this was pirate treasure. And there was a stream near where they found this ammo box, this geocache, and they said, there's got to be more pirate treasure, and we think it's on the other side of this stream. We've got to get over there. So instead of Megan saying, well, no, we're going to get wet, it's winter, water's going to get in our boots, we're a long ways from the back at the center. So she could have said, no, we can't go over there. She said, that's a great idea. Let's figure out how we can get over there. So the kids decided that they needed to make a raft or a boat to get across the stream. So Megan had them brainstorm different kinds of materials. How would they make a boat or a raft? They came up with a lot of ideas. They finally agreed on basically weaving together a bunch of sticks with fabric. So, she said, how could we do this? The kids said, sticks, Miss Megan. We could put sticks in the water and float across just like a pirate ship. So this is what the kids came up with. I don't think this is the finished boat or the finished pirate raft, but this was on the way towards it being finished. So they made the raft, and then they had to figure out how to get it to the stream, which was actually about 3/4 of a mile away. And it was kind of heavy. So there was another problem-solving activity with figuring out how are we going to get it down there. So the kids devised this technique of putting it on a wagon, and it wouldn't stay on the wagon because it was pretty bumpy along the way. So there were kids that had to run ahead on the path to get logs and rocks out of the way, and then kids that had to support it in back. They eventually got it down to the stream, where I don't think this is the actual crossing place, but what they found was that, what they found was that they found a place that was narrow enough so that the raft could become essentially a bridge, and it allowed them to get across the stream without getting their feet wet. And they beamed with delight at their own triumph. Now, once the kids got across the stream, Megan got concerned. She thought, uh-oh, the kids think there's pirate treasure over here. What's going to happen when we don't find another geocache? They're going to be, disheartened, all this work for nothing. However, when they got to the other side, they found a place where the water level had been higher, the water level had dropped out, the ice had broken. And so the children gasped at the sight of the treasure. Those magical ice chunks glittered and sparkled in the sunlight, just like diamonds. Ahoy, pirates, we have found our jewels. There be pirate treasure in Illinois after all. So the kids were just as happy to have found these big triangular shapes of ice that were diamonds to them, that proved to them that the pirates had indeed been there. So they were successful. It was a good idea. They were successful and they found pirate treasure. This is a great example, I think, of what started as just a play activity. Gee, let's see if we can figure out how to get across that stream. And Megan, with great finesse, turned it into a STEM learning activity that involved lots of engineering problem solving. Another example of, this is more of a science and engineering activity of hillside tennis ball runs. So you need a slope, essentially, and a tennis ball or some other kind of a small ball that you can challenge kids to make a pathway down the slope that will make the ball do something. So in that picture on the left, it has to kind of, you have to make it so that it makes a kind of an S curve path down the hillside. I saw this one year, and then a couple of years later at a preschool program in Minnesota, the same thing was going on. So in that picture on the left here, there's kids with a purple wiffle ball that they had actually found at another location, and they were rolling it down the hill. And the idea was to make it go through that little arch in the fallen down tree. And so they were doing the same thing of building up a pathway to guide the path to a certain target. At another school in this same district, this is in the Circle of Friends Public Preschool in Prior Lake, Minnesota, the kids were using gutters and wooden wheels as pathways. So it's convergent evolution because there's this recurrent fascination with things rolling downhill and figuring out how to make the thing that's rolling down the hill follow a certain pathway. Inherently appealing for kids. This Circle of Friends preschool, by the way, is really interesting. We've been doing some research there over the past years because half of the preschool programs in this public school district are nature-based and half of them are traditional. And actually there's a third group that are kind of some nature, some traditional. And so it's a really interesting case study to compare outcomes of kids that are doing two very different kinds of preschool, but with the same intentions. We're getting down to the end. This is Matt Flowers' program. This is the preschool environmental education program of the Urban Ecology Center in Milwaukee. This is Matt from a couple of articles that Matt wrote. And there's not a lot of nature around a lot of these Head Start programs in Milwaukee. And so his intent was to figure out all the ways to use asphalt and the built environment with the little bits of nature that are around as part of his programming. And Matt is particularly good at modeling how to do kind of physically active things with kids who need more physical activity. So many preschool programs are sedentary indoors. When you move kids outdoors, researchers found that outdoor kids are twice as physically active as indoors. So just the process of being outdoors and exploring the built environment is part of what's healthy for kids. So Matt does these great guided movement activities in the natural world and with built environments. So that activity up above is, taking sticks and running them along the chain link fence. The lower activity is, I think, him tossing a leaf into the air or leaves into the air. And then last, urban gardening. When you have limited exploration space, but some outdoor space, especially in southern climes. So this is from St. George's Episcopal Preschool in New Orleans, written by Claire Loughran. And there are a bunch of good articles in the books about how what to do with the gardens. So this particular activity was about observing, drawing, and planting spring bulbs. So in the lower right-hand picture, they're taking different amounts. This is a good math activity too. So many shovelfuls of mulch, so many shovelfuls of dirt to make the right matrix for planting spring bulbs. And so Claire's moved on from the Episcopal preschool that she worked in and has created the New Orleans Nature School. So I'm going to end with these images from her New Orleans Nature School, which now takes place in an urban park in New Orleans. And so there's this image of kids, and this is another convergent evolution example, with fallen down trees are one of the best playscape installations that you can have. So these is the sky above and the mud below. This is one of those pictures that you have to be a really hardy preschool teacher, assured in your convictions that mud is good for kids to tolerate this kind of activity. And so essentially the message is, all children, whether in urban or rural or suburban areas, deserve nature-based education. And that's what these couple of books, Redleaf books, have been about from my perspective. Meredith, I'm done.
Thank you so much, David. I love all of those stories, especially the pirate. And there's a lot going on in the chat as well. One of my favorite things about doing these webinars is to see this sort of community come together, even if it's just for an hour, and share their expertise and resources. We do have some time for questions, and I am going to get through as many as we can in the time allotted. And I know that some of these could be entire webinars on their own. So we're going to start with one. This was pre-submitted from Orchid. They are an outdoor educator, and they have a group of about 21 students ages 4 to 8. And they are wondering, what is a good balance of free play and lessons / hands-on learning outdoors?
Yeah, this is a good question. And I've kind of addressed it in a couple of different places. In the nature preschool and forest kindergarten books, there's a wonderful chapter written by a woman from the Wald kindergarten in Natick, Mass, where she articulates a difference in the conceptualization of what early childhood education should be about from the European perspective and the American perspective. The European perspective is more frequently focused on early childhood education as the development of initiative and resilience and independence. Whereas the American perspective is much more a focus on early literacy and math and social obedience, right? Following the rules. From a developmental perspective, I probably come down more on the European perspective side of the equation. In other words, for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, I think it's much more important to focus on physical development, child-initiated play, independence, resilience. There's a lot of development of hardiness in these programs. However, from an American perspective, I think an overemphasis on free play is more problematic of a cultural sell. So most parents like the idea of, who are interested in these kind of programs, like the idea of free play, but they really want to make sure that their kids are going to be ready for kindergarten or first grade. So my attitude is that you really need a kind of balanced approach between what conventional 4-year-old or 5-year-old curriculum ought to look like and the free play. And so that's why I have that example in there of the one of the schedule that has both of those elements in there. So in a lot of the Forest Day programs in kindergartens in Vermont, there's always a lesson that's math or literacy oriented, and then there's also free play. So I think about a 50-50 ratio of play versus academics in outdoor settings. That doesn't mean that I'm not necessarily sure that's the right developmental thing, but I think it is the right thing for where we're at in the early childhood community in the United States right now.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And this question comes from Christina. They are really looking forward to the new book, Sky Above and Mud Below, and they, in your first book, Nature, Preschool and Forest Kindergartens, you wrote that the vast majority of preschools and forest kindergartens are half-day school year oriented and tend to serve wealthier families that don't need full-day care. But they are in an extended day childcare center in Virginia that is embracing the nature-based model for all ages, infants and up. Are you seeing more of these nature-based full day, full year childcare centers? And is there a network specifically of these providers that they could tap into?
So this is a great point. This is a really good issue in terms of equity, because as long as these programs are half day or 9 to 3 kinds of programs, it precludes a lot of working parents from being able to use them because they need before care and after care. So the attempt to try and make them 7:30 to 5:30 or 5 kind of programs is really valuable and important. Yes, there are lots of programs, especially in urban areas, that are moving in that direction. The whole initiative in Washington State to create a unique set of guidelines for outdoor preschools and basically have them be state approved will lead to the potential for them to be publicly funded with child support funding, which will allow them to do the full day programming. So I think if there's a network, it would be this group. I can't remember what the organization is called in Washington State, but it's the Washington Outdoor Education, Preschool Outdoor Education Association, something like that. It's easy to find. Mm-hmm. I know in Kittery, Maine, the program at the Kittery Community Center has a full day program, that goes from 7:30 to 4:30 or 5. Really popular. Waiting list, for people get their kids on the waiting list 3 or 4 years in advance. The Boston Nature Center, run by Mass Audubon in Boston, has the full day program. Whether there's a national network just of those kind of programs, I'm not sure. The place to figure that out would be the Natural Start website, which is part of the North American Alliance for Environmental Education.
Right, that's the Natural Start Alliance, is that right?
Yeah. Well, it's Natural Start. Natural Start is the name of the website.
Is that okay?
The organization is the North American Alliance for Environmental Education.
Great, perfect, thank you. Okay, and this is one from Annalise. The phrase, quote, "we need to change the culture of families" makes me, unquote, makes me pause when referring to BIPOC families when camping. In what ways can we tap into or elevate traditional nature-based learning from different cultures rather than changing it to just our cultural understanding of nature-based learning?
I'm not sure that I understand that question, because I don't think of camping as being specific to our culture. I think that living in the natural world is pretty much an inherent part of most cultures.
Mhm.
So I don't think of it as imposing a upper middle class white practice onto other people's cultures. I remember when we were working in a place-based program in Boston and working with inner city public schools, and we did research on the cultural literacy of the people that were running these programs, and a lot of the African American parents said, no, this nature-based stuff this is what we did as kids. So was this preconception that the African American parents were urban and they wouldn't like the nature-based stuff. And in fact, a lot of the parents said, who were from the South or from the Caribbean, said, no, this is what we did. This is what we did as kids. And so this is what we want for our children. So I would happily have more conversation about this, but I'd love to see some, for instance, of a culture that doesn't have some strand of spending time in the natural world overnight as being an inherent thing that's valuable.
Great. I've seen a lot of questions about sort of budget. So this one is, how do we address families who do not have the budget to purchase these layers and high quality warm winter, almost lost it, sorry. Winter clothing. I work for a government agency. They do not provide the proper warm layers for educators to teach outside in the winter.
Yep.
We've had a couple of other participants chime in, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, Meredith, if I don't remember, remind me to send you this great New York Times article about, okay, here's the good equipment. It's not even worth starting a program or starting doing more outdoor stuff with your group of kids or center unless you solve the clothing problem. And so there are a variety of ways in which people solve this problem. One is by just starting to have a lending library of clothes. So as kids age out of the program, parents have this, they don't have any more young kids. They've got leftover raincoats that are too small. They don't want them anymore. You take them, you have to commit to creating sorting and storage systems so that you can, have sizes and of different boots and rain gear and rain pants, so that you can give them, either lend them to kids for the school year or give them to kids. Another thing that a lot of teachers do is just is that they did in the program budget, they allocate a certain amount of money to purchasing secondhand outdoor gear for kids from Salvation Army or used clothing stores, of which there's a lot. So you do have to figure out a way to get the clothes and make it available to the kids at no cost. Otherwise, that's going to be a barrier that's going to be really hard to get over with your kids and families.
And this question comes from Lorna. We are located in an urban setting and struggle to come up with ideas for the kids outdoors. We have no real outdoor space of our own. They use local public playgrounds within walking distance, and their group is infants and toddlers. Do you have any specific ideas for them?
Yeah, so the big idea here is incremental steps towards naturalization of children's experience. So you may not have access to natural settings, but you do have access to city parks, as you said. And the idea is that it's valuable to have kids outdoors and moving inherently. And even if it's infants and toddlers, it's great for them to be out in the air. And it's great for them to be moving, whether that's on city streets. And so the thing that Matt did was he came up with lots of different ways to diversify outdoor movement with kids in urban settings, so that sticks along chain link fences, and balancing along curbstones, and balancing on, lots of balancing activities and lots of different things, jumping up onto stuff and jumping down, climbing over, all those kinds of things, even in urban settings, are healthy for kids, because a big part of what 3, 4, 5-year-olds need, and even 1 and 2-year-olds need, is to start developing physical competence. So don't worry about the fact that it's not nature-y, but do think about how to be out in the neighborhood. The other thing that happens is that whole is the interaction with people in the town or city, which is also valuable for kids. So there's a socialization opportunity there, also socialization problems sometimes, but socialization opportunities, and then lots of physical development opportunities. There was at one of these schools in Boston, there was a parent group running an after-school program, and they specifically, their idea was to take the kids. This was not toddlers, infants and toddlers, it was older kids, but their goal was to take the kids to all the different outdoor park venues in Boston within about a mile of the school. And then they wrote a field guide for parents to all the different places that were possible to go for parents and kids.
Very nice. Great. We do have a lot more questions, but unfortunately I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And there has been a lot of really great resource sharing in the chat. So I'm going to include the chat in my follow-up email for all attendees and everyone who registered. And David, if you don't mind just going to the next slide really quick, I want to remind everyone of a few things. For registering today, we did create a code Sobel25, and that will give you 25% off both the Sky Above and Mud Below and or nature-based preschools. Nature preschools and forest kindergartens. That's valid for the print or ebook, whatever your preference is. We're also going to be sending around the certificate of participation for everyone who joined us today. This webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on demand, so you can go back and reference it later. David, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and share your energy and expertise. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would love to reach out to you and ask you all of their questions. So maybe I will send you a few more and we can set up another time to talk again. Thank you everyone for joining us. Really appreciate you all being here with us.